Okay, folks, this is Dr. Mark, more officially, Dr. Mark Carriage. And you can go to Dr. Mark's YouTube, Progressive Therapy. If you actually want the slides and see the other videos that we're doing. Okay, so I'm working on a YouTube series on hypnotic, breaking up the hypnotic interventions in 5 or 6 different segments. Then I'm going to roll into the group therapy, and then I'm going to roll into regular therapy. And then after that, if I'm able to, talk about um, assessing and treating men that sexually offend. Okay, so this is a professional video. It's not for kids, it's for professionals in the field, in mental health, that is, that field. Okay, I do have a dry sense of humor, so I might have to tell you when to laugh. In this particular video is part 4. It's on the basic class, what I call the classical techniques of hypnotherapy. This should be a 20-minute ordeal. And I got to give you a little bit about myself. If you haven't seen any other videos, I've been in the field for 45 years or so, give or take a few months. I got my bachelor's degree at SIU in 79, SIU Edwardsville, that is, the lesser of the two party schools. I got my master's and PhD in counseling, master's in 81, PhD in 85, both from St. Louis University. I did do an internship, psychology internship at Texas Tech University at the Counseling Center. And that was one of the best experiences of my life for professional development. I go by Dr. Mark, Dr. C. I've been working in the prison system for over 40 years. I've been called a number of things by all kinds of staff and clientels at the prison. I'm currently in private practice, working under Chad at Metro East Counseling in Swansea, Illinois. I got to say, I've had the privilege and honor to travel with my father, Dr. Peter Carriage, in the early 80s, as he was from the 70s, 80s, possibly 90, um, on the faculty of the ASH, which stands for American Society of Clinical Hypnosis. He was on the workshop faculty. And so at that time, I was able to meet the best of that era, except for the great Dr. Milton Erickson, who passed away in 1980. I was like 21, 22 in working on my master's. So people have really invested in me that really didn't have to do nothing. And so I want to give back and pay it forward. This is one way. Matthew Adams is helping me on this project, but he is not present today. Okay, so the hypnotic experiences we're going to talk about involves paradoxical or irony because it starts out with highly conscious focusing and you end up tapping into the unconscious process. Simple. So if we go about defining it, it's defined as there's a big controversy about non-state. We could argue about all kinds of theoretical stuff in the field, but the current issue seems to be still whether it's a state or non-state. In one sense, it really doesn't matter because the argument is, to me, almost ridiculous. I do like to. I've been brainwashed in things or states, but I could see the other side of it very clearly. But two sides of the coin are connected. And so we have what is a hypnotic state? Well, it's a state, a dazed, if you will, experience um, involving internal focusing of attention on some stimulus. And what happens is it creates a dissociative response, and you become oblivious to immediate surroundings. The key is internal focusing of attention, highly concentrated attention on something, internal or external. So the common thread of state, non state, whatever state, is focused attention. Okay, so I'm going to flush it out a little more, hopefully not bore you into a trance, because that is a good way to get folks in induced trances, is through boring them into a trance or confusion. That's not what this is about today. So the hypnotic experience is consciously focusing attention or concentrated attention, fixated attention on some selected internal external stimulus. So what happens is you're interrupting, they're going about their day, do 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 do, and then you refocus the client on some interrupts their current stream of consciousness, um, thereby really accessing the unconscious process. Thus, it creates a excuse me, cascading effect through the mind body process. Yes, folks, the mind body is connected. Ernest Rossi really pointed that out in a series of papers and books and so forth. The man was a genius. But anyway, he points all this stuff out. And he was more of a state guy, too. So was Milton Erickson. Um, and one of the final parts of this hypnotic series, I'll discuss why this stuff works and might talk a little bit more about theories and such. But the mind body process is axated. There's a cascading effect, lighting up different points of the brain. So immediate consciousness is, and along with behavior, temporarily suspended, creating a dazed experience. So I'm beginning to like that word experience versus state. There are numerous versions, forms of, or expressions of, and also I want to say levels of the hypnotic experience, going from very light levels to very deeper levels, which I think I addressed in the first session, part one of this series. And it can be found on my website, YouTube website. I think it's Dr. Mark Progressive Therapy. It's some, just type that in, you might bring it up. I'm a bit dyslexic, and I had one of those moments where I don't exactly remember what I called the website. But at any rate, that's for you guys to figure out. Um, so when you're focused, different forms would include, and look at the thread with each form. Basic relaxation, those relaxation exercises, meditation, reflection, if you will. That's what meditation really is. Deep breathing. Benita Jinks was brilliant, and she did a lot of work on just deep breathing and would induce trances through that. Yes, and I've met her, and she was spectacular in her day. Um, Mindfulness. What is mindfulness? I'll address that towards the end of the video. That's just you're focusing, internal focusing, without because you're suspending critical judgment, so you're not critically judging anything. So what's when you're focused, the features that also may include oblivious to immediate surroundings and creating a dazed experience or a sense of dissociation. That's a fancy word for meaning detachment. And I'm looking at it as a positive, not the negative DSM stuff. It's an altered experience, again, or state suspension of behavior, both overt means internal and external, or means overt means external behavior, and covert, which means internal behavior, and ultimately consciously accessing the unconscious process. So at one level, you're still in reality, you're conscious of what's going on. Another level, you're into your own little world. But all this creates, again, a cascading effect of the mind body process. So a hypnotic state is usually defined as suspended state from immediate awareness of reality, but yet at one level, you're still in reality. So it's requiring some degree of internal absorption, thus creating an altered state. Again, the key is focused, fixated, concentrated attention, suspension of behavior. Now, there's numerous techniques. We'd be here all year to get into all the techniques. I did list a whole bunch of them in our training manual on therapy techniques. I'm a techniquey kind of guy because I like to know how stuff works and try to frame up the experience, the therapeutic experience in terms of techniques and responses, realizing the process is essential. That comes from the technique. Before I get into some of the more techniques, and it's important to know your techniques, but I need to really throw a heavy suggestion in that you get properly trained in this before you go out and do it. You can do basic relaxation, some basic imagery, because you probably do that anyway, some deep breathing, some other mindfulness stuff. But if you're going to get into the hypnotic stuff more deeply, I would suggest getting trained by the American um, Society of Clinical Hypnosis. Again, that's for short, ASH, or the Milton Ericksonian Foundation. Either way, those are the best. Um, they will train you up. So, and some of the trainers are probably in both, doing both sides of that training entity. Okay, so before I talk about imagery, I was talking about different expressions, but here's some everyday natural occurrences because we're going to be talking about some naturalistic techniques in a minute. And so, like if you're reading a book and you're lost in the book because you're so focused and you don't hear anybody calling your name, especially kids and stuff, um, that means you're in a trance experience or state. And likewise, if the kid is so focused on TV, movie, Miss Rachel is one of my grandkids' favorites, and she can actually be in very entrancing. And these kids are learning so much from her. I got to give her a prop. Um, she's doing stuff that most of us really cannot even wrap our minds around. But kids are learning. Little bitty kids are learning. My little 9-month-old granddaughter is learning from Miss Rachel, but it's entrancing. That's the point I was trying to make. Um, at any rate, uh, so if you're trying to get the kids' attention, but the kids focused on whatever on TV, it's not. Hopefully, the kid's not just blowing you off, but the kid's focused in a trance experience. The same thing if you're going down the highway, the road, and you lose 5 miles. Hopefully, you're still on the road, and you're wondering where the 5 miles went. That's another form. That's another thing of it. Okay, now we need to really talk about imagery. If I'm going to keep this in the 20-minute version. Imagery. Originally, it was a visualizing process. So I still, I'm so conditioned, if you will. I still think of it as a visualizing process, but it's really more of an envisioning process involving all the sensory, when I say all, really 5 sensory modes, at least the 5 I know about. Um, some people will claim that it's a mental representation of stimuli that are images, and that's true. But I think envisioning captures all the 5 senses. So imagery can be either guide or structured or non-structured. So guided is you're following some protocol, you're helping the client, you're guiding them through whatever they're going to experience. And non-structured is the client is on their own. You provide a couple of droplet suggestions and they're manufacturing their own imagery journey, if you will. Okay, basic relaxation. These techniques encompass essentially relaxation. I like to use the deep muscle relaxation. Um, and I do have another PowerPoint for the general audience. I'm quite not sure if I'm going to go through that or not. I will end up putting it on the website because it does go through the details of deep muscle relaxation. Um, I like to use pushing out tension, and I published it back in the late 80s because the old historical thing is you tighten up your muscles, then they relax, you're releasing the energy and the tension. Well, I get cramps. I can tell you, I'm not into pain, any otherwise, not into pain, period. And so if you simply just push out tension and feel the relaxation flowing through each part of the body is what you shoot for. Okay, we're going to talk more about mindfulness again. That's really focused attention on something, but you're not analyzing it or criticizing it. No critical judgment. Deep breathing um, and such. And I will say, go back. Jacobson in 1938 is the first one I could find that really is credited with the relaxation protocol. Later, Whoopi in his systematic desensitization process of fears on the fear hierarchy used to use the relaxation protocol and would induce relaxation, really calming responses, and pair it with the smallest increments of fear going up to the largest in his fear hierarchy. Then we're getting the more covert conditioning, which is a topic I will be doing for the therapy series. Okay, idiomotor syndrome. What the heck is that? That means it's little minimal, and I mean minor, nonverbal. I like to use finger movements, but you could use whatever movement it suits your fancy. But that's how you communicate with the client. I do not prefer to verbally interact with the client and have them give me verbal responses. Although they have before in the past, I generally don't go that route. I'll ask a question and they will either give me a finger movement for a no or a yes and set up in the before we get into any kind of working on issue stuff. And the moving hands technique. Well, Ernest Rossi took that a step further and developed this moving hands technique, which not only induces trance experiences, but he's resolving client issues as well. He doesn't, a lot of times, he doesn't even know what the issue is, but he moves through helping having the client move their hands towards resolution. Just highly interesting. And of course, furthermore, there's the famous Erickson handshake technique, which we'll get into. Pseudo time distortion. Time is not even a concept unless we arbitrarily assign time. That's why I have different time zones because we're arbitrarily saying this is what this is. But when you're in a trance experience, if you will, time is just gone. Doesn't mean nothing. So then you're heading into using this in terms of addressing therapeutic issues. I also need to say that any of these techniques are not the entire therapy. It's not like hypnotic intervention is the therapy. Hypnotic interventions are part of the overall therapeutic overlay of your approach. So there's two subparts of this: age regression and progression. Age regression simply means you're going back into time. You're recalling memories. And you can have vivid age regressions where the person is like right there on Johnny on the memory. And you have to be careful because they're going to be re experiencing whatever they're re experiencing at that time. I like to do the partial, where the person goes back, visits the memory, but is from a distance, let's say. So anytime like data learnings really weren't up to the hypnotic stuff, we did a special issue in 1990, freaked some of them out. Um, and others thought it was okay. But they did the early recollections. Adler did that way back up in 1900. Actually, Freud did that too, but he didn't call it that. He called it free association. Um, hate to dive into history, but I love history. And so anytime the client recalls, and the early recollection is they're recalling their earliest recollections from that technique. I think there's been a volume or two written on it by other folks. I don't really recall their um, names. Gosh, I'd have to go back in my own history to recall it. Anyway, so you're hypnotically reorienting a person to his or her past. Obviously, it's used in a lot of trauma work as the client retrieves memories. But you're not going to change the memories, folks, in therapy. You're going to change the meaning attached to the memory. We don't like to alter memories. It's not right. We don't like to add memories. It's not right. There was a big heated discussion on that with a famous psychiatrist back in the 90s on in terms of the multiple personality um, people. Okay, there's a number of ways to conduct age regression. I like to use journeys. You can use time machines, train. I like to use train trips actually. Any type of trip going backwards into time. But I want to point out, anytime you have a client recall memories, they're telling you what's going on in the past. You're actually using a hypnotic. It's a hypnotic element in there because you're age regressing them back into time. So what's age progression? It goes the other way. Again, time really doesn't mean nothing in terms of the hypnotic experience. So instead of going backwards, you're going forwards in the time. You're having the client experience some something in their future that they haven't physically already experienced or went through. And so they can gain knowledge of and a handle on the experience, coping skills, and everything else with that by experiencing something in their future. I love the futuristic thing. I call it futuristic projection. Hanlon calls it a future pull. You can call it what you want, but you're pulling the client into their future. So this could include dreams, fantasies, pretending, behavioral rehearsal, the old famous Adlerian as if, and later what they called what if, the miracle question in solution therapy. Solution focused therapy is that's very hypnotic, by the way, but it's a future pull. Um, and Bill Hanlon put out a book about 10 years ago or so, 8 years ago, um, addressing client trauma without drama. I forgot the exact title, but that was the essence of it. William O'Hanlon studied with Milton H. Erickson towards the end of Erickson's life, and he addresses trauma without even getting into the actual memory of the issues because he pulls the client forward and builds on that. So anytime you project yourself or the client into their future, you're using a form of age progression. That includes, like, if you're figuring out what you're doing tomorrow, instead of paying attention to this, that's a form of age progression. Okay, I'm kind of running over my 20 minutes, so I'm going to hurry up, kind of. Doing suggestions, you can either deliver them directly or indirectly within the trance experience for the client to enact or figure out what to enact or figure out what's going on, the meaning of it. That's the indirect piece. The direct piece would be you're suggesting that the client do something or engage in something. Okay, post hypnotic means they're gonna activate the suggestion after the trance experience. It's post trance experience. Okay, what's parallel communication? It's really metaphors, if you would. It's metaphoric techniques, I call it. But we have to really be fancy with the terminology. So it's communication consisting of symbolic representations, is what it is. Symbolic means something represents something, but you're not directly telling them what it is. So there's different forms. There's stories. There's stories within stories, like Langton in '83 really wrote a book on the embedded metaphor, which was stories within stories. So you're telling a story, then suddenly within the story, a character or somebody is telling another story, and so on and so on. Within all that mess is the therapeutic messages. So analogies, puns, riddles, jokes, other images, some task assignments, and some humor with that. Um, okay, pantomime is nonverbal tactics. Milton Erickson was fantastic, and his personal position, where I learned the famous Erickson handshake, was from Dr. Marion Moore at one of these ASH trainings, and he asked for somebody to come up, and he shook their hand, of course, and immobilized them. Of course, I thought it was made up. I thought it was scripted. I was skeptical. Then during intermission, I asked what was going on, and he explained how to do the handshake technique, which is very indirect induction. So if you have clients that are in crisis, you can shake their hand, calm them down, just redirect their focus off the crisis. And the hand and arm levitation is the hand or arm floating up. I had a guy in group in 1990 in the high risk groups we used to run. They were heavy duty, but he went into a spontaneous trance state in group. And after 45 minutes, some of the group members were like freaking out. I told him to calm down because this was fascinating. And he was actually reliving his offense history and the trauma that was instilled in that whole mess. But he had his arm sticking out. That's the point of the story. He had his arm sticking out for like 45 minutes in the air. I can't do it for 5 seconds unless I'm in a trance state or experience. Back in the days, and I'm about ready to wrap this up, but back in the days when you can actually do demonstrations in classes without being ridiculed by your supervisors, um, I was talking about the hypnotic stuff in a therapy class. I can't even tell you which one it was, but anyway, um, I was explaining the handshake technique, and I did a couple of examples, some light stuff, shaking hands, but inducing really some very light trance stuff. And then somebody said they didn't believe it. I asked her, I said, well, you won't know until you try it. I shook her hand. She went into a very deep, I mean, deep, simplistic trance state, and she had waterfall tears coming out of her eyes. I went on with the lecture to prove to the class that this was not previously set up. Again, that skepticism. They're being in corrections. Um, at any rate, then I told her to put her hand down, and she may put her hand down. She did, and the water tears dried up just like that. Like the faucet was turned off. Asked her what was going on, if she wanted to share, and she said, "Well, basically, what happened was uh, I'm in a bad relationship. I gotta get out of it. That was it, and I gotta get out of it now." Okay, so a lot of stuff occurs naturally, and so what Erickson would do a lot of times, would have 2 hour sessions, which I can't do that these days. But anyway, he did it because he was waiting for that window of opportunity with the ultradian 90-minute rest cycle popping up in that 2 hours, and the person would naturally go into a trance state and he would capitalize on it. Okay. The symbolic experiential stuff. Um, a lot of times I did a lot of imagery, maybe having the client imagine writing something out and stuff. Again, in the days when you can actually do demonstrations in class to teach people how to really do these techniques and stuff. Um, I asked for a volunteer. Somebody volunteered. A young lady volunteered, and she had a chip on her shoulder. She was kind of bitter. I could tell she was kind of bitter. Her classmates thought she was kind of bitter. And it turns out that her niece died at a very young age um, in her childhood, and she was very pissed off about it and upset with God and such. So I had her do this imaginary writing thing and such. One thing led to another. I had her basically resolve the issue through writing. But she actually didn't write nothing because it was all in her mind. Long story short, brought her out. She felt a lot better. The burden was lifted. Her classmates commented that, hey, she's not bitter no more. What's going on? Okay, so interspersal means you're having an ordinary, everyday conversation and you maybe drop accent, different words or phrases and stuff, and it blends into the interaction and communication where the client is not aware of. Again, you're bypassing, sidestepping defensive structures, if you will. So suggestions could be embedded in that conversation. I've already talked about naturalistic. I don't think I need to go any more into that. Mindfulness, I've almost hammered it to death because the bottom line is you're paying attention without any kind of judgment. You're suspended in your judgment. Okay, to me, it's a trans thing. We wrote a paper on it, and the Ericksonian folks really liked the paper, published it. Again, the key is you're focusing on some selective stimulus, creates a detached response because you're not critically commenting. Okay. Conclusion is, as in the essence, as much of therapy is conducted hypnotically anyway, just most people are not aware of what they're doing. But you can point out different sessions. There's hypnotic elements, and I think in a lot of the techniques. And so, and the other thing is, a lot of times therapists and client are not really aware of accessing the unconscious process when they do. And that concludes today's thing. Again, if you want to reach me, I'm at MCARICH at AOL.com. Yes, at AOL.com. And I do have a flip phone still. So, yeah, I'm kind of ancient. I'm just getting into this video taping stuff for YouTube. This video went a little longer than I really wanted it to go, but oh well. At any rate, hit me up on the internet if you have any questions or if you want the PowerPoint or anything. Thank you.